A fateful encounter. The icy wind howled across the frozen landscape as Jake trudged through the knee-deep snow. His breath came out in visible puffs, and his thermal suit struggled to keep the biting cold at bay. This was not how he had imagined his mission, a solo exploration of an uncharted planet. But something about this place felt off. Jake's scanner beeped, breaking the eerie silence. His brows furrowed as he checked the screen. A faint energy signature was pulsing nearby. He adjusted his path, his boots crunching against the frost-covered ground. Minutes later, he stumbled upon the source, a sleek alien craft half buried in the snow, its metallic surface glowing faintly. It was unlike anything Jake had seen before. The ship looked damaged, as if it had crash-landed. Smoke rose in thin trails from its side, and one of its doors was ajar. Cautiously, Jake approached, his hand resting on the blaster strapped to his hip. "Hello," he called out, his voice muffled by the howling wind. No response. Inside the ship, the air was warmer but smelled of burnt metal and something else, something organic. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Jake's heart raced as he stepped further in, his boots echoing softly on the metal floor. Then he saw her. A tall, slender figure lay slumped against the wall. Her skin was a shimmering blue, her features both alien and delicate. She was badly injured, her body covered in strange cuts and bruises that glowed faintly. Beside her, cradled in her arms, was a smaller figure, a child, no more than 5 or 6 in human years. Jake froze. The woman's eyes snapped open, glowing a bright, piercing silver. She stared at him, her expression a mix of fear and determination. Before he could react, a voice echoed in his mind. "Please, help us." Jake stumbled backward, clutching his head. The voice wasn't coming from his ears. It was inside his mind. "What? Who are you?" he stammered. The woman's gaze softened. She struggled to sit up, wincing in pain. The child in her arms whimpered, clinging to her. "We mean no harm," her voice whispered telepathically. "But they are coming. You must protect him." "Wait, who's coming?" Jake asked, his grip tightening on his blaster. Before she could answer, a loud hum filled the air. The ground beneath them trembled. Jake glanced out of the ship's broken window and saw dark shapes descending from the sky. His blood ran cold. "Zarnak," the woman said, her voice trembling. "They have hunted us across the stars. They will stop at nothing to take him." Jake's mind raced. He didn't know who the Zarnak were, but he could tell they were bad news. The woman reached out to him, her hand trembling. "Please, take my child. Protect him. I will give my life if I must." Whoa," Jake said, raising a hand. "Hold on. I didn't sign up for this. I'm just an explorer." The child whimpered again, looking up at Jake with wide, glowing eyes. Something in those eyes stirred a strange feeling in him, an instinct to protect. The ship shook violently as something heavy landed outside. Jake's instincts kicked in. He crouched low, peeking out through a crack. 3 figures, tall and armored, stalked toward the ship, their weapons gleaming. Their movements were predatory, their faces hidden behind terrifying helmets. "They're here," Jake whispered, his heart pounding. The woman grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Take him and run," she pleaded. "I will hold them off." Jake hesitated. He didn't know this woman or her child. He didn't owe them anything. But leaving them to die, he couldn't do that. "I'll get you both out," Jake said firmly. "No one gets left behind." The woman's eyes widened in surprise. "You are different." Jake didn't wait to hear more. He scooped the child into his arms, the little one surprisingly light, and helped the woman to her feet. She winced but managed to move. "Stay close," Jake said, his voice low. As they stepped outside, the cold hit them like a wall. The Zarnak warriors turned, their glowing red eyes locking onto the group. One of them raised a weapon, aiming directly at Jake. "Run!" the woman shouted, pushing Jake forward. The first shot missed by inches, melting the snow where Jake had been standing. He ran as fast as he could, the child clinging to him tightly. The woman stayed behind, firing a strange, glowing weapon at their pursuers. Jake reached his small ship, fumbling with the controls. The child stared at him, fear and trust mingling in its glowing eyes. "We're gonna be okay," Jake muttered, trying to convince himself as much as the child. The woman appeared moments later, her movements slow and labored. "Go," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They will not stop. You must keep him safe." Jake hesitated. "I'm not leaving you." A loud explosion shook the ground as the Zarnak closed in. Jake knew they were out of time. He pulled the woman onto the ship and slammed the hatch shut. As the engines roared to life, the Zarnak fired, their shots barely missing the rising craft. Jake piloted the ship into the sky, his hands shaking. Below, the icy planet grew smaller, but Jake's sense of danger only grew. He glanced back at the woman and child. "What have I gotten myself into?" he muttered. The woman's voice echoed in his mind one last time. "You've made a choice that will change everything." A mother's plea. The hum of the ship's engines filled the cabin as Jake navigated through the dark void of space. He glanced at the alien woman, Lyra, slumped in the corner of the cockpit. Her shimmering blue skin had dulled, and her breathing was shallow. The child, Maiko, clung to her, his glowing eyes wide with fear. Jake sighed and leaned back in his seat. He had no idea what he'd just signed up for. He'd found plenty of strange things on his exploration missions before, but this was a new level of crazy. "Okay," Jake said, breaking the silence. "Start talking. Who are you? And who the hell were those guys back there?" Lyra opened her eyes slowly, her silver gaze locking onto his. "We are refugees," she said, her voice weak yet steady. "My people are fleeing the Zarnak, a race of conquerors who leave nothing but destruction in their wake." Jake raised an eyebrow. "And the kid? What makes him so special that they're chasing you halfway across the galaxy?" Lyra hesitated, glancing at Maiko, who was now dozing against her side. Her expression softened, but there was pain in her eyes. "Maiko is the key to our survival. His genetic code carries a unique sequence, an anomaly, that could neutralize the Zarnak's greatest weapon. If they capture him, they will exploit his gift and destroy what's left of my people." Jake's grip on the controls tightened. "So let me get this straight. I'm stuck in the middle of a galactic war because of some genetic miracle, kid." "Yes," Lyra said bluntly. "And I chose you because you were the only one who didn't shoot first when you saw me." Jake winced. She had a point. Still, he wasn't exactly thrilled about being thrown into a war zone. "Look, lady, Lyra, this isn't my fight. I'm just an explorer trying to map uncharted planets. I'm not some hero." Lyra leaned forward, her expression intense despite her weakened state. "You may not think you are a hero, but you have a choice. If you abandon us, Maiko will die. And with him, the last hope for countless lives." Jake stared at her, her words hitting harder than he expected. He didn't sign up for this, but could he really turn his back on a child? Before he could answer, the ship's alarms blared. Jake's eyes darted to the radar, where a cluster of red blips was rapidly approaching. "Zarnak ships," Lyra said, her voice sharp despite her exhaustion. "Great," Jake muttered, flipping switches on the console. "They're like cockroaches. They just keep coming." Lyra struggled to her feet, leaning heavily on the wall. "We cannot fight them. Not in this ship. We must find shelter." Jake scanned the nearby star map. There wasn't much in the way of options, but one location caught his eye: an abandoned mining station on a nearby asteroid. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. "Hold on," Jake said, steering the ship toward the asteroid. "This might get bumpy." The Zarnak ships closed in, their weapons lighting up the void. Jake maneuvered wildly, dodging the blasts with practiced skill. The ship shook violently, warning lights flashing everywhere. "We're not gonna make it," Jake shouted as another blast skimmed the hull. Lyra placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "You must. For him." Jake gritted his teeth, her words echoing in his mind. With a final burst of speed, the ship dove toward the asteroid. The mining station loomed ahead, a dark, skeletal structure clinging to the rock. Jake guided the ship into one of its docking bays, barely managing to land before the engines gave out. "Everybody out," Jake yelled, grabbing a small bag of supplies. Lyra stumbled, clutching Miko to her chest. Jake helped her down the ramp, his eyes scanning the dark interior of the station. It was cold and silent, the kind of silence that made his skin crawl. "This place hasn't been used in years," Jake muttered, leading them deeper into the station. "But it should keep us hidden for a while." As they settled into a small, secure room, Jake worked to repair his comm system. Meanwhile, Lyra tried to comfort Miko, who hadn't spoken a word since they'd escaped. "You're his mother, right?" Jake asked, glancing at her. Lyra hesitated, then shook her head. "Not by blood. I was assigned to protect him when he was born. My life belongs to him." Jake frowned. "That's a lot of responsibility for one person." Lyra gave a faint smile. "It is the duty I chose. And now I am asking you to share it." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You don't even know me. What makes you think I can do this?" "Because you already have," Lyra said simply. Before Jake could respond, the station's sensors lit up. The Zarnak had tracked them. "They're here," Jake whispered, his stomach sinking. Lyra's expression hardened. "Then we fight." A narrow escape. The metallic walls of the mining station creaked and groaned as the Zarnak ships descended onto the asteroid. Jake peered through a small crack in the wall, watching their sleek, black vessels land with unsettling precision. His heart pounded in his chest. These weren't mindless pursuers, they were hunters, and their prey was inside this very station. Behind him, Lyra was preparing Miko, wrapping him in a thermal blanket and whispering soothing words in a language Jake didn't understand. Her calm demeanor in the face of danger was unnerving. Jake, on the other hand, was anything but calm. "They're going to find us," Jake hissed, pacing the small room. "This place is like a tin can. No defenses, no weapons. We're sitting ducks." Lyra turned to him, her silver eyes steady. "We still have time. The Zarnak will search systematically. Their overconfidence is their weakness. We must use it against them." Jake frowned. "Weakness? They've got warships and death squads, and we have this." He gestured to the flimsy metal walls around them. Lyra stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "Your ingenuity has already saved us once. Trust yourself." Jake wanted to argue, but the determination in her eyes silenced him. He nodded reluctantly and began inspecting the room. It wasn't much, but there were a few crates of old mining supplies, cables, tools, and a couple of damaged drones. Not exactly an arsenal, but it was better than nothing. "Okay," Jake said, his mind racing. "We can rig a few traps, slow them down. If we're lucky, we might even take out a couple of them." Lyra nodded. "Do what you must. I will shield Miko." As Jake worked, the faint sound of heavy boots echoed through the station. The Zarnak were inside, their metallic footsteps a chilling reminder of how little time they had. Jake used every ounce of his ingenuity, rigging tripwires with sparks from a malfunctioning drone, and setting up decoys to mislead the intruders. "Here's the plan," Jake said, his voice low. "When they get close, I'll lead them away. You take Miko and hide. I'll meet up with you later." Lyra shook her head firmly. "You cannot fight them alone. It's suicide." "I don't have to fight them," Jake countered. "I just need to keep them busy long enough for you two to escape." Before Lyra could argue, the station's lights flickered. The Zarnak were getting closer. Jake grabbed his blaster and took a deep breath. "Stay quiet," "Stay hidden," he whispered, glancing at Miko. "I'll see you on the other side." Jake slipped out of the room, his heart pounding. The narrow corridors of the station felt like a maze, each turn bringing him closer to the enemy. He could hear their guttural voices, speaking in a harsh alien tongue. Then he saw them, tall, armored figures moving with terrifying precision. Their black helmets glinted in the dim light, and their weapons hummed with deadly energy. Jake swallowed hard and fired a single shot down the corridor, hitting a pipe. Steam burst out, creating a hissing cloud. "Hey, over here!" Jake shouted, running in the opposite direction. The Zarnak turned sharply and began pursuing him, their heavy footsteps echoing like a drumbeat. Jake led them through the corridors, ducking under low beams and jumping over debris. Behind him, he heard one of his traps spring, a loud explosion that made the walls tremble. "That's one," Jake muttered, grinning despite himself. But the Zarnak weren't easily deterred. They adapted quickly, moving in coordinated formations that cut off Jake's escape routes. He found himself cornered in a dead-end corridor, his blaster almost out of charge. "Great," Jake muttered, backing against the wall. The Zarnak advanced, their weapons raised. Just as Jake thought it was over, the ceiling above them groaned. A pile of heavy mining equipment, dislodged by one of Jake's traps, came crashing down. Two of the Zarnak were crushed instantly, their armor crumpling like tin. Jake didn't wait to celebrate. He darted down a side passage, his lungs burning. He had to get back to Lyra and Miko before it was too late. Meanwhile, back in the hiding spot, Lyra's strength was waning. She clutched Miko tightly, her body trembling with exhaustion. The effort of shielding him from the Zarnak's psychic probes was taking its toll. "Mama, I'm scared," Miko whispered, his voice barely audible. Lyra pressed her forehead to his. "You are strong, my star. Stronger than you know." The sound of approaching footsteps made her stiffen. She positioned herself between Miko and the door, her hand glowing faintly as she prepared a final defense. The door burst open, and Jake stumbled in, panting and covered in soot. "Time to go," he gasped. Lyra didn't argue. She scooped Miko into her arms, and together they ran through the station, Jake leading the way. Behind them, the Zarnak regrouped, their guttural shouts echoing through the halls. Jake guided them to a service tunnel that led back to the docking bay. His ship was damaged, but it was their only chance. "Get on board," Jake shouted as he fired a few desperate shots to keep the Zarnak at bay. Lyra hesitated. "They will follow us." "Let them," Jake snapped. "We'll deal with that when we're out of here." With no time to argue, they climbed aboard. Jake slammed the hatch shut and powered up the engines. The ship groaned but managed to lift off, narrowly avoiding a barrage of enemy fire. As they soared into the dark void, Jake glanced back at Lyra and Miko. "You two really know how to make an impression," he muttered. Lyra gave a faint smile. "You have a talent for survival, Jake." "Yeah, well, let's hope it holds out," Jake replied, staring at the stars ahead. The Zarnak ships were still in pursuit, but for now, they had escaped. The fight was far from over, but Jake couldn't deny the strange sense of purpose that had taken hold of him. The safe haven. The mining station faded into the void behind them as Jake pushed his battered ship to its limits. The Zarnak vessels were still on their tail, their relentless pursuit a constant reminder of the danger they faced. Jake's hands gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white. "We can't keep running forever," Jake muttered, glancing at the sensors. The Zarnak ships were gaining, their weapons locking onto his ship with deadly precision. Lyra, seated beside him with Miko cradled in her arms, closed her eyes. "There is a safe haven nearby," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "An abandoned outpost. It is hidden, shielded. If we reach it, they will lose us." Jake glanced at her. "And you're just telling me this now?" Lyra opened her eyes, her silver gaze piercing. "It is not easy to trust, human. But I have no choice. The coordinates are in your star map." Look for grid 12G. Jake pulled up the map, quickly inputting the coordinates. The outpost wasn't far, but it was tucked inside an asteroid belt. Navigating through it would be dangerous. This better work, Jake muttered, shifting the ship's trajectory. Hold on tight, everyone. As the ship approached the asteroid belt, the Zarnak opened fire. Blasts of energy streaked past them, narrowly missing the hull. Jake cursed under his breath, weaving the ship between massive rocks that drifted lazily through space. Why can't they just give up? Jake growled, narrowly dodging another barrage. They do not stop, Lyra said, her voice heavy. It is their way. Jake gritted his teeth and focused. He maneuvered the ship through the dense field of asteroids, using the massive rocks as cover. Behind them, one of the Zarnak ships miscalculated and collided with an asteroid, exploding in a fiery burst. One down, Jake muttered, though the victory felt hollow. Finally, the outpost came into view. It was a dark, skeletal structure built into the largest asteroid in the field. The station was ancient, its metal exterior scarred and rusted. Jake had his doubts about its structural integrity, but it was their only hope. We're here, Jake said, guiding the ship into one of the docking bays. The landing was rough, but they were alive. For now. The trio stepped out of the ship, their breath visible in the frigid air of the outpost. The place was eerily silent, its corridors dimly lit by flickering lights. Jake kept his blaster ready, his eyes scanning for any signs of movement. This place gives me the creeps, Jake muttered. It is safe, Lyra said, though her tone betrayed a hint of doubt. She led the way, her steps steady despite her obvious fatigue. Maiko clung to her, his glowing eyes wide with curiosity and fear. They found a central chamber that seemed intact, with functioning life support and power. Jake immediately began scanning the outpost's systems, looking for anything they could use. Looks like this place was abandoned decades ago, Jake said, his fingers flying across the console. Minimal supplies, but enough to keep us going for a few days. Lyra nodded, settling Maiko onto a small cot. It will do. For now. As Jake worked, Lyra sat beside Maiko, stroking his hair. The boy had been silent for most of their journey, but now he looked up at her, his expression uncertain. Are we safe, Mama? Maiko asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra hesitated, then smiled softly. For now, my star, but we must be ready to move again. Jake overheard their conversation and sighed. We can't keep running forever, he said, turning to face them. We need a plan. Lyra looked up at him, her gaze steady. There is a plan, Jake. It is why we came here. Jake frowned. What are you talking about? Lyra reached into her satchel and pulled out a small crystalline device. It glowed faintly in her hand, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. This is a beacon, she explained. It will call for help. My people are scattered, hidden across the galaxy. If they receive this signal, they will come. Jake stared at the device, his skepticism obvious. And what if the Zarnak pick up the signal too? They will, Lyra admitted. But we have no choice. If my people do not come, we are already lost. Jake ran a hand through his hair. Great. So we're painting a giant target on our backs and hoping for the best. Hope is all we have, Lyra said simply. Reluctantly, Jake nodded. Fine. But if we're doing this, we need to be ready for a fight. This place might be hidden, but it's not exactly a fortress. For the next several hours, Jake and Lyra worked to fortify the outpost. They set up traps in the corridors, reinforced the main chamber, and powered up the station's ancient defense systems. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Finally, Lyra activated the beacon. The crystalline device glowed brightly, sending out a pulse of energy that rippled through the station. Now we wait, Lyra said, her voice quiet. Jake leaned against the console, exhaustion weighing on him. I hate waiting, he muttered. Hours passed, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, the station's sensors lit up. Jake sat up straight. "We've got incoming." Lyra moved to the console, her expression tense. "Is it them?" Jake checked the readings, his stomach sinking. "Yeah. Zarnak ships. A lot of them." Lyra placed a hand on Maiko's shoulder. "Stay close to me, my star." Jake grabbed his blaster and took a deep breath. "Looks like the fight's coming to us." As the Zarnak ships closed in, Jake couldn't help but wonder if they had made the right choice. But deep down, he knew there was no turning back. A deadly betrayal. The faint hum of the Zarnak ships vibrated through the walls of the asteroid outpost. Jake stood by the console, his blaster holstered but within easy reach. The ancient station's sensors confirmed his worst fear. There were more Zarnak ships than he'd anticipated. He counted at least 5 on the monitor, circling the asteroid like vultures around a dying animal. "They're not rushing in," Jake muttered, his eyes narrowing. "They're waiting for something." "They are strategists," Lyra replied, her voice strained. She was seated beside Maiko, her hands glowing faintly as she shielded him with her energy. "They know we are cornered." Jake clenched his fists. "Well, that's just great. I don't suppose you've got a miracle in that bag of yours." Lyra looked at him, her silver eyes heavy with unspoken emotions. "Miracles are rare, human. But we may not need one, if our allies respond to the beacon." Jake wasn't convinced. He had been in tight spots before, but this felt different. The Zarnak weren't just after survival. They wanted total domination. And the stakes here weren't just his life. They were Lyra's, Maiko's, and the future of an entire race. The console beeped, snapping Jake out of his thoughts. The station's rudimentary communication system flickered to life, a static-filled message cutting through the silence. "This is Commander Rate of the Zarnak fleet," a deep, guttural voice growled. "We know you are inside. Surrender the child, and we will let the rest of you live." Jake scoffed, leaning toward the microphone. "Yeah, right. And I'm a Martian prince. You'll have to do better than that." The voice returned, colder this time. "You underestimate us, human. There is nowhere to run. You will not survive. But the choice is yours. Give us the child, or we will tear that station apart piece by piece." Jake cut the transmission, his jaw tightening. "They're bluffing. They want us scared." "No," Lyra said quietly. "They mean every word." The tension in the room was palpable. Jake could feel the weight of Lyra's gaze, the quiet strength in her demeanor. But just as he was about to speak, the console lit up again. This time, the signal wasn't from the Zarnak. "It's the beacon," Jake said, his heart racing. "Someone's answering." Lyra leaned forward, hope flickering in her eyes. "My people." Jake adjusted the controls, filtering through the static. The signal was faint but unmistakable. "It's coming from a nearby system. Whoever it is, they're on their way." Relief washed over Lyra's face, but it was short-lived. The console blared a warning. A new Zarnak ship had entered the area. And this one was bigger, deadlier. Jake's stomach dropped as the sensor readings updated. "That's not just any ship," Jake said grimly. "That's their command vessel." Lyra's expression darkened. "Their leader is here." Before Jake could respond, the lights in the room flickered. A sharp sound echoed through the station, metal grinding against metal. "They've breached the outer hull," Jake shouted, grabbing his blaster. Lyra stood, her movements deliberate despite her weariness. "We must hold them off until reinforcements arrive." As Jake moved toward the entrance, a sudden realization hit him. The Zarnak shouldn't have been able to locate the station so quickly. The asteroid belt should have hidden them longer. "They're not just smart," Jake said, narrowing his eyes. "They had help." Lyra stiffened. "What do you mean?" Jake turned to her, his voice low but firm. "I think someone betrayed you. Someone told them where to find us." Lyra's face was a mask of shock and anger. "Impossible. My people are loyal." "Are they?" Jake asked, his tone cutting. Because the only way they could have tracked us this fast is if someone sent them our coordinates. Before Lyra could reply, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. Jake raised his blaster, motioning for Lyra to stay back. The first Zarnak soldier appeared, its dark armor gleaming under the station's flickering lights. Jake fired, the blast striking the soldier in the chest. It staggered but didn't fall, its armor absorbing most of the impact. Of course they're tougher than they look, Jake muttered, firing again. Lyra stepped forward, her hands glowing with energy. She unleashed a blast that sent the soldier flying, its body slamming into the wall with a sickening crunch. Not bad, Jake said, glancing at her. They will send more, Lyra replied, her voice grim. And she was right. More soldiers flooded the corridor, their weapons blazing. Jake and Lyra fought side by side, their movements coordinated despite their differences. As the battle raged on, Jake's suspicions deepened. The Zarnak's movements were too precise, their tactics too tailored. Someone had to be feeding them information. In the chaos, Jake noticed Maiko's wide eyes watching everything, his small hands gripping the edge of the cot. Despite his fear, there was something unshakable in the boy's gaze, a quiet strength that reminded Jake why they were fighting. After what felt like an eternity, the tide of soldiers slowed. Jake leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. "We can't keep this up," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Lyra nodded, her glow dimming as exhaustion set in. "Our reinforcements must come soon, or all is lost." The console beeped again, but this time it wasn't a warning. Jake rushed to check the display and felt a surge of hope. "They're here," he said, grinning. "Your people made it." Lyra's shoulders sagged with relief, but the moment was short-lived. The Zarnak command vessel loomed outside, its weapons charging. "This isn't over," Jake said, his voice hard. "Not by a long shot." As the station trembled under the weight of the enemy assault, Jake knew the real battle was about to begin. The last stand. The asteroid shook violently as the Zarnak command vessel unleashed its fury. Blasts of energy tore through the station's outer walls, sending debris and sparks flying in every direction. Jake braced himself against the console, struggling to maintain his balance. The reinforced chamber they were in was holding for now, but it wouldn't last much longer. Lyra clutched Maiko tightly, her glowing hands shielding him from falling debris. Her face was pale, her strength waning, but her determination was unshaken. "They won't stop until we're dead," Jake said, his voice grim. He checked his blaster, low on charge, as usual. "We need to hit them where it hurts." Lyra nodded, her silver eyes locking onto his. "There is a way. The command vessel has a central core, a power source that fuels their entire fleet. If we destroy it, we can cripple them." Jake frowned. "Let me guess. The core's heavily guarded, and getting to it is basically suicide." Lyra gave a faint smile. "It is our only chance." Before Jake could respond, the console lit up. A new signal was coming through, this one strong and clear. "This is Captain XL of the Vinari Resistance. We've received your beacon and are engaging the Zarnak fleet." Jake felt a wave of relief as the outpost's sensors showed a cluster of ships arriving on the edge of the asteroid belt. The Vinari ships, sleek and angular, began firing on the Zarnak vessels, drawing their attention away from the station. "They made it," Jake said, grinning. "Looks like we've got some backup." Lyra's expression softened. "It is not over yet. The command vessel must be destroyed, or their forces will regroup." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Of course it's up to us. Why wouldn't it be?" He turned to Maiko, who was staring at him with wide, glowing eyes. "Hey, kid," Jake said, crouching down to his level. "You stay here with your mom, okay? I'll take care of this." "No," Lyra said firmly. "I am coming with you." Jake stood, shaking his head. "You're barely holding it together. You've done enough. Let me handle this." Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady. This fight is mine, as much as it is yours. And Maiko needs you to survive. If we fail, you must protect him." Jake wanted to argue, but the fire in her eyes silenced him. He nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But if this goes south, we're pulling out. No heroics." Lyra didn't respond. Instead, she placed Maiko in a small alcove, shielding him with a faint shimmer of energy. She knelt down and pressed her forehead to his. "Stay hidden, my star," she whispered. "You are the light of our people." Maiko clung to her for a moment before nodding. "Be careful, Mama." Jake and Lyra left the chamber, the corridor filled with the distant sounds of battle. The Vinari ships were keeping the Zarnak fleet busy, but the command vessel was still active, its massive weapons firing with precision. The two of them moved quickly through the station, dodging debris and skirmishing with stray Zarnak soldiers. Jake's traps had taken out some of the initial wave, but reinforcements were pouring in. "We're running out of time," Jake said as they reached an access hatch leading to the asteroid's surface. Lyra opened the hatch, revealing a harsh, airless expanse of rock and dust. The command vessel loomed above, its massive form blotting out the stars. "There," Lyra said, pointing to a glowing port on the underside of the ship. "That is the entrance to the core." Jake stared at the port, then back at her. "You've got to be kidding me. How are we supposed to get up there?" Lyra pulled a small device from her satchel, a grappling launcher. "We climb." "Of course we do," Jake muttered, grabbing the launcher. The climb was grueling. The asteroid's weak gravity made every movement slow and deliberate, and the Zarnak ships circling above added an extra layer of danger. Jake and Lyra moved in silence, their focus absolute. When they finally reached the port, Jake hacked into the access panel, bypassing the ship's security system. The hatch hissed open, revealing a narrow tunnel leading inside. "Let's move," Jake said, stepping through. The interior of the ship was a stark contrast to the asteroid's barren surface. The walls pulsed with an eerie organic glow, and the air was thick with a metallic tang. "They're going to know we're here," Jake said, his blaster at the ready. Lyra nodded. "Then we must act quickly." They navigated the maze-like corridors, encountering resistance at every turn. Zarnak soldiers fought with relentless ferocity, but Jake's quick thinking and Lyra's energy blasts kept them at bay. Finally, they reached the core chamber. The room was massive, dominated by a glowing, pulsating orb suspended in the center. Energy crackled around it, illuminating the space in harsh, shifting light. "That's it," Lyra said, her voice almost reverent. "Destroy that, and their fleet is finished." Jake approached the core, his fingers hovering over his blaster. "Any idea how to take it out?" Lyra handed him a small device, a compact explosive. "Place this at the base. It will destabilize the core." Jake nodded, his movements careful as he set the explosive. But just as he armed it, the chamber doors burst open. The Zarnak leader stepped through, towering over his soldiers. His armor was darker than the void itself, and his red eyes burned with malevolent intelligence. "You dared defile my ship," the leader growled, his voice echoing through the chamber. Jake raised his blaster, his heart pounding. "Yeah, we do. Got a problem with that." The Zarnak leader laughed, a chilling sound that made Jake's skin crawl. "You will not leave this place alive." Lyra stepped forward, her energy flaring. "You underestimate us." The leader lunged, and the chamber erupted into chaos. Jake and Lyra fought desperately, their movements coordinated but strained. The explosive timer ticked down, the seconds slipping away. "Jake!" Lyra shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. "Go. Protect Maiko." "What about you?" Jake yelled back. Lyra didn't answer. Instead, she unleashed a blinding surge of energy, her final act of defiance. The force knocked the Zarnak leader back, buying Jake enough time to escape. Jake hesitated, but Lyra's voice echoed in his mind. "Go." With a heavy heart, Jake turned and ran. The explosive detonated seconds later, the core erupting in a brilliant cascade of light. The Zarnak fleet faltered, their ships powerless as the command vessel disintegrated. Jake barely made it back to the outpost, his heart heavy with the weight of Lyra's sacrifice. A new beginning. The asteroid station was eerily quiet in the aftermath of the explosion. The command vessel's destruction had sent shockwaves through the Zarnak fleet, leaving their remaining ships drifting, powerless and disorganized. The once mighty hunters were now scattered debris in the vast void. Jake stumbled into the reinforced chamber where Myko had been hiding. His body ached, his mind reeling from the events that had just unfolded. Myko looked up as the door slid open, his glowing eyes searching for the one person who wasn't there. "Where's Mama?" Myko whispered, his small voice trembling. Jake froze, his chest tightening. He knelt in front of Myko, placing a hand on his shoulder. She made sure we were safe. She gave us a chance." Myko's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't cry out. Instead, he clung to Jake, his tiny hands clutching the fabric of Jake's jacket. Jake held him close, his heart breaking. He wasn't sure how to explain sacrifice to a child, let alone one carrying the weight of an entire species. "We'll get through this," Jake murmured, his voice low but firm. "I promise. She believed in you, and I'll make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain." The station's console beeped, pulling Jake out of the moment. He gently pried Myko's hands away and moved to the controls. The Venari fleet was hailing them. "This is Captain Sel," the voice crackled. "We've secured the area. The Zarnak fleet is in disarray. What's your status?" Jake pressed the comm button. "We're alive, barely. Lyra didn't make it, but the command vessel is down." There was a pause on the other end, then a somber reply. "She was a true warrior. Her name will be honored." Jake leaned against the console, exhaustion washing over him. What now? The Zarnak might be out of commission for now, but they'll regroup. They always do. "We'll take Myko into our care," Captain Excel said. "He'll be safe with us." Jake stiffened. He glanced at Myko, who was staring at him with wide, expectant eyes. The boy didn't understand the conversation, but he could sense the tension. "No," Jake said firmly. "He stays with me." "Jake," Sel replied, his tone mourning. "Myko is vital to the survival of Lyra's people. This isn't about you." Jake's jaw tightened. "You think I don't know that? I watched his mother give her life for him. I'm not handing him over to strangers, even if you're his people. He needs someone to protect him, someone who's not just using him as a symbol." There was a long silence. Finally, Sel spoke again, his voice resigned. "Very well. But know this, human. Raising him means carrying the burden of our people. His safety is paramount. If you fail, the galaxy will pay the price." Jake smirked bitterly. "No pressure, huh?" The Venari ships began their retreat, taking the surviving Zarnak prisoners and leaving Jake and Myko alone on the station. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the outpost's systems. Jake sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair. Myko climbed into his lap, resting his head against Jake's chest. For the first time, Jake allowed himself a moment of vulnerability, his own tears falling silently as he held the boy. Days later, the asteroid station was a temporary refuge, but Jake knew they couldn't stay there forever. With the help of Lyra's remaining notes and the Venari data they'd shared before leaving, Jake began repairing his ship and planning their next move. Myko followed him everywhere, watching with quiet curiosity. The boy rarely spoke, but his presence was a constant reminder of why Jake couldn't give up. "Here," Jake said one day, handing Myko a small toolkit. "You want to help? Start with that panel over there." Myko's face lit up, a small smile breaking through his grief. He took the tools and went to work, his tiny hands surprisingly deft. Jake watched him, a pang of pride swelling in his chest. He wasn't a parent. He'd never even thought about being one, but something about protecting Miko felt right. A new mission. As the ship's systems came back online, Jake plotted a course to a distant, uncharted sector. The Venari had mentioned a hidden sanctuary, a place where Miko could learn about his heritage and grow into the leader his people needed. But Jake wasn't just taking Miko there to hand him over. He was staying. "You ready for this, kid?" Jake asked as they strapped into the cockpit. Miko nodded, his small hands clutching the armrests. "I'm ready." Jake smiled, flipping the ship's ignition. "Let's make sure your mom's sacrifice wasn't for nothing." As the ship lifted off, leaving the asteroid station behind, Jake felt a strange sense of purpose. He wasn't just an explorer anymore. He was a protector, a guide, and in some ways, a father. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, and the Zarnak threat wasn't over. But Jake and Miko weren't just running anymore. They were moving forward, ready to face whatever came next. And as the stars stretched out before them, Jake knew one thing for certain. Their story was just beginning.